flash duration. We were debating whether or not to keep this slide in here. So again, this is like an excerpt of the full course, right? It's a little bit of a difficult concept to get, but you need to get it because this is taking what we talked about, the differences between constant and ambient light, or constant and flash, to the next level. And this is really the important part. Flashes, they look like they're firing instantaneously, right? And for the example, we said, let's assume that this is 1/10,000th of a second. That's always not the case, okay? Now for our eyes, it looks like it's actually firing pretty quickly. But let's do this. I'm gonna dial this up to full power. Ben, close your eyes. Okay. If you guys are watching this, oh, it's gonna recycle. Do you guys see a trail, a light trail? Do you guys actually see it brighten up and then like red kind of as it falls off? I used to think that was my eyes. Like I used to think my eyes were playing tricks on me when I looked at a flash and I'd see it pop, but then I seemed to see like light dimming away afterwards, okay? So just watch it again real quick. Watch it and see if you can see the light dim. Do you guys see it? That's called the flash duration. Now, if you were to slow this down, okay, let's say we're using super high-speed cameras, right? And we slow this down, but we're gonna use it in our minds. High-speed cameras in your heads. I like it, she's got her eyes closed, beautiful. Imagine this. Okay, what your flash is actually doing is it's powering up. When it hits the peak, the burst happens, right? We actually hear that burst. You can hear it when it goes off. You hear that little pop? That's that 100% point when it bursts. But guess what? For it to turn back, or basically for it to go all the way back down to 0, it actually takes time. So it cycles up, fires, and then it's trailing off. So your eyes aren't actually playing tricks on you. The light is actually getting brighter and then dimmer, but it's doing it incredibly quickly. When you run it at lower flash settings, right? Like let's say that we're at 1/16th power. You don't see it because it's happening so quick, okay? But when you go up to full power, you do see it. Now what we call this is a T5 versus a T1 time. And I know this sounds like complicated and stuff, but it's not. Manufacturers, this is the funny thing, they're gonna play tricks on you. They're gonna go, our flashes are so fast, you can use them for anything. Our T5 time is this. And I want you guys to be aware of what that actually means. A T5 time is the amount of time it takes for 50% of the flash power to dissipate. So it fires and trails off to 50%. Now guess what? If you're shooting at full power and it takes, let's say, 1/250th of a second for your flash to hit that T5 time and your subject is moving, are they going to be frozen? No, right? It works the same way constant light would work. The 50% of the amount of a full power flash is still a lot of light that it's putting off. So the more accurate measurement is what we call the T1 time. T.1, T1, T whatever. Terminator? I don't know. So the T1 time tells us how much time does it take for 90%. I'm sorry, I'm like walking around so much. I'm kind of just like that. You guys are like following me around. I'm like, these poor camera guys. Okay, so for 90% of the light to get dissipated, that's the amount of time that matters to us. So that's when you look at a flash and see how fast can that flash actually fire, that's what matters, is the T1 time, for 90% of the light to drop away.
You want it to be shorter.
You want it to be shorter. And that's why like people pay a lot of money for Broncolor type packs, you know, those packs, because they have incredibly fast flash durations, even when used at very high flash powers. So generally, the rule of thumb is this. Every flash is going to differ. Higher the power, the slower your T1 time, meaning the more power you're asking your flash to give you, the longer it's going to take to cycle up and power down. Okay? The T1 time measures the ability of the flash to freeze. Pocket strobes are generally faster, so these guys are generally faster than studio strobes. But guess what? They don't put out as much power. Okay? So sample T1 time for a 580EX at full power is 1/250th of a second. So, and I made this mistake too. I was like, you know, have you seen those ring shots where they drop them into water and they fire flashes and it freezes it perfectly? The very first time I did that 6 years ago, I put my flashes right there. I'm like, I need a lot of power. And so I powered them up to like 1 second. And I was like, why isn't this working? I can see the rings moving as they're dropping through. And it didn't make any sense until I was like, oh, I learned about flash duration. I needed to power those flashes down. And guess what happens? At 1/2 power, the duration becomes 1/1000th of a second or near that. At 1/64th power, so low power, it becomes 1/14,000th of a second. So now your flash can actually freeze things incredibly well when it's run at those lower powers. So another great light for studio strobes that they use a lot to freeze things is like an Einstein. Einsteins have very good flash durations, and they're inexpensive as well, so they're really good. The one thing I usually avoid, avoiding, is like these generic lights that you find on eBay, these really inexpensive lights. If something's inexpensive, if it seems too good to be true, if it's something that, it looks that way, it probably is, okay? You can get a lot of super cheap lights. There's one light, and these times are from Andy Gok. Andy is a photographer that put all these numbers up on his site, which is fantastic. You guys can check it out if you want more details. But he put up this generic eBay light, and it actually shows that the lower the power setting, the slower it's getting. So at 1/32, it's down to 1/100th of a second. I mean, that's not even a flash anymore. That's like a short duration constant light, okay? Does that make sense? So what this chart showed was, this is 1/1000th of a second drawn out, right? This is at T1 time, when the flash's power is dissipated to that point. That's the measurement that we're looking for. So when you're doing the dance floor shots, and this is where I'm going to see if it clicked. What power setting on your flash do you think you need to be around? Not the low. We were at like 1/4 to 1/8, because remember that you don't need it to be that fast. You still need some power. But you guys got the idea. Like you're not going to be shooting it at full power, because it won't be freezing. You'll be doing this, and then it'll look blurry, and you're like, why is it looking blurry? So at least at 1/4 power, we're probably shooting, let's see, at 1/4 power, it's already, even at half power, a flash like this would be around 1/1000th of a second. That's enough to freeze somebody dancing, right? As long as you're not at full power, basically, you're okay. Was that too crazy? It wasn't that bad, right? What's up, Cliff?
Can I ask about,
yes.
like, say for the Einsteins, if you're shooting with them, are you trying to drop around 1/4 of a power on all your lights? Like your main light,
so if you want to use an Einstein to freeze, you do need to do the same thing. So just like you would with this, but 1/4 power on an Einstein is like 6 times more, or 10 times more powerful than 1/4 power on this guy, right? So you would do the same thing. You drop the power so you get to an adequate flash duration. So this is the one thing that people get hung up on, and I can see every one of you have already got it, and that's it. That's it for balancing now, flash to ambient light. That's the only things that matter now. We've got it. Any other questions? That was a really great question, Cliff.
Do you use all the same speed lights, same manufacturer for the same color values or the same quality of light?
You can. Like for my pocket strobes, I love the Metros Plus system. And by the way, I don't use anything. I know people always do this online. They're like, Pi was paid to say that. I'm like, no, I don't use anything that, or I don't recommend anything that I don't use myself personally, okay? So we're not getting paid to say any of these things. The Metros Plus is a really great system. They're $400, but they're full featured, meaning that it has a built-in radio, it has everything. So those are the ones that I use. Justin likes his Canon 600EX RTs. Chris likes, I think he uses the 600EX RTs too. It's really a matter of preference, but sticking to one flash is generally a good idea, just so, like you said, consistent color values. Every flash, it's funny, like the higher end flashes, you pay that money for them because they make your life easier, right? If we're putting together an ad campaign and an Einstein, it's a fantastic light, but let's say that there's a 50-degree color variance from shot to shot. This is what happens basically with these studio strobes. Less expensive strobe is going to do everything that a real strobe, or everything that a more expensive one would do. It'll just make certain things a little bit more cumbersome. So let's say that it's not as precise in its color temperature. For wedding photography, who cares? It does not matter. 50 degrees, 100 degrees, it doesn't make a single bit of difference. But for advertising, if we're putting together things in a campaign, that's where using a nicer light would make your life easier, okay? So when we talk about gear, and we talk about all the gear that we use, we try and tell people, like, look, we use Profoto, we use Broncolor, we use everything. Everything has its own purpose. If I can get away with a speed light, I will, I'll totally do that. The nicer gear you have, the simpler your life becomes, but it doesn't make your images any better, if that makes sense. So you could do the same thing. You could take shots on multiple different flashes and just fix them in post. That's like the worst sentence in the world. Fix it in post. Anyway, alrighty. What do we have next? This is one of my favorite slides, because this is going to be another moment. Any other questions, by the way, before we go into this?
Pi, do you ever work with a light meter for measuring?
Good question. If you are doing like commercial type stuff, shoots, yes. But if it's like I'm tethered and I'm doing like a simple shoot in the studio and I can get away without it, no. Like most 99% of my stuff is without a light meter. And it's just because it's easier. It's not to say that it doesn't have its purpose. It does. It makes your life easier. If you want to measure very precise measurements, then they're great to have. But in a wedding workflow, it doesn't really fit. So.
Follow-up question. In those wedding settings, do you try and maintain a particular distance because of your flash settings and the way that light travels through a space or a room to who you're photographing?
Yeah, so when I'm shooting, like typically I'll shoot on a lot of primes, or like if I'm shooting portraits or whatever it is that I'm doing, I'm generally going to be at one focal length for at least a couple, like 30 seconds or so, right? So I'll dial in my flash power, and as I move, I'll move the flash power as well. So I kind of like keep it, if I'm going to be 6 feet between you guys, I'll keep it at 1/8. When I move to, this distance, I'm going to go up to like 1/4 or 1/2. So I'm just adjusting based on that. So yeah, that's inverse square law, and that's very applicable. We left it towards the end, so if we get to the bonus stuff, we'll talk about it. But again, that's one of those bigger, that's a bigger beast that I don't want to get too much into. But yes, you do adjust. Okay, we have 30 minutes. I want to get into some shooting. This is the next most confusing thing that people get when they say flash cannot look natural. This is what's wrong in their heads, okay? And there's nothing wrong in their heads. They're perfectly good people. But this is where they're thinking not quite right. It's the flash to ambient balance. If your image looks dramatic and you don't want it to, you want it to look natural, just remember, the world's not falling apart. My flash to ambient balance is probably just a little bit off, okay? What that means is, if we want a more natural look, we brighten our ambient light and we reduce our flash power, okay? So as we reduce flash power and brighten ambient, we're creating a more natural look to the images. So that gives you these examples right here. So again, the flash is just kicking the model. We call it a kick, right? We're just adding a kick to her just to kind of brighten the model up a little bit. So if you look to these images, you'll see that she just brightens up a little bit. But we still leave the background blown out. It gives a very nice natural look. Same thing here. We're just adding it as a soft fill. Same thing here. We're still leaving the background blown out. We're just adding a soft kick. If you want dramatic, you go to the other side. So you pull down ambient light and you raise the power of your flash. And I know I should have flash power should have gone this way, but that would have made it all confusing. So we just drew it all in the same direction. So raise flash power, pull down ambient, you get dramatic images. Bring your ambient up, pull down flash power, you get natural looking images. I got a I'll take it. I'll take it.